Oh my gosh, you're in the UK right now. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started then, since it's late on your end. Yeah, usually people just kind of filter in as they go, but um, oh yeah, we've Let me just turn this off since I feel like Zoom does a weird thing where it'll sometimes duck the my voice when the music's playing when it should be the other way around. But yeah, welcome everyone. Let me just pause this here for a moment. Um, yeah, we've been offering a lot more workshops, I would say, like this year in regards to like what we offer and guest artists that we have been having. So I hope you've been enjoying them. But yeah, to just introduce myself, my name is Lauren. My artist name is Minnie Bear, and I'm the chief educator for FEMME House. I basically create all of the curriculum on the music production side of things. Um, but yeah, we offer free monthly workshops. And for the past few years, we've been doing also 2 online courses. And the difference between workshops and courses, workshops are kind of just like one off topics, where the workshops are like 1 to 2 hours. And then with the online courses, they're month-long online courses where we typically offer 4 live stream classes that are like 2 hours long each. And you typically also get access to like PDF content and uh, video content, like short tutorial video content, in addition to getting access to the recorded live streams. The nice thing about those is that you can also tune in to the classes when they're live. And it's more of like, I would say, like more of like kind of like a boot camp situation where you're assigned homework and you actually like create tracks as the course is going on. So actually, we are going to be having our first course of the year coming up pretty soon. So keep an eye out for that. But yeah, a little bit about me beyond being the educator here at FEMME House. I'm a producer, songwriter, vocalist. Um, and yeah, I initially started off making, I would say, like synth pop music, circa like, gosh, I started like the Mini Bear project, I want to say like 2012. And then I kind of transitioned to creating more within like the dance world, dance music, a few years back, and started DJing as well, which influenced the way that I produce. So I'm really excited about today's topic because we are going to be focusing on creating groove and feel. So before we get into this topic and before I start talking about the idea of like what groove is, I'm just curious. I mean, there's just a few of us in the chat right now. So if you could interact with me, that would be great because that's going to help inform the way that this workshop is laid out. But yeah, if you want to just like type in the chat, if you consider yourself like a beginner producer, or if you consider yourself to be more intermediate or advanced, and also what it is that you're wanting to get out of this particular workshop. My best guess is you did read the workshop description. So you have probably a general vague idea of what we're going to be focusing on today. But the gist of this workshop essentially is just creating groove and feel and getting all of our elements to like really lock in together to create the feel that we want. But yeah, it's always helpful to kind of just get gauge as far as what people are wanting to get out of these workshops and what you're wanting to learn, because that helps me kind of inform where I go. And then also when I'm creating topics for workshops and courses, that also helps me out as well, getting feedback. Cool. Beginner, basics on building groove on a track through specific instruments or rhythms. Great. Um, so I am going to focus on You know, obviously there's so many different types of drum patterns, and I feel like we did a workshop last year on drum patterns in different genres, and uh, someone on our FEMME House team has been uploading those videos, by the way, to FEMME House's YouTube account. So I'm pretty sure that you can probably watch that video on YouTube. Um, but I am going to demonstrate a lot of dance music patterns today, just because that is the wheelhouse in which I am working it in. But what I'm going to be doing is showing you some tips and then also showing you some project examples of songs that I've been working on that demonstrate how you can basically like lay down your drum patterns and then how that can interact with the bass to create like a more just like better groove essentially. Um, but yeah, let's just hop into it. And if anyone else wants to chime in, feel free to type that in the chat. Let's get into it. All right, so what is groove? And I feel like you can probably get a few different answers depending upon who you ask. And as you comb through the internet, you might get some different takes on it. But this is how I'm going to define it. So I would say like groove can be defined by how elements in your song. And when I say elements, that could be like drum elements. So, you know, kick, clap snare, toms, closed hats, hi hats, open hats. Um, and then other elements in a song could be like bass, could be like a lead synth, it could be like a rhythmic type synth, it could be like piano, vocals. So these are all elements, right, that we can add to our song. And then I also actually think of, and we'll focus on this a little bit later, but I think of silence as something that also can contribute to groove. So, you know, versus rather than filling all of the space in your song, you can actually use silence to interact with when sound is actually there, when elements are actually there to create a feel. So, to kind of reiterate, groove can be defined by how elements and silence interacts to create a feel. To put it simply, groove is what you nod your head to and or it's typically what makes you want to dance. Groove can be super impactful as it can determine how your track feels on the dance floor. A couple of other important concepts that we should probably talk about before we really get into the nitty gritty. So one concept would just be the idea of like tempo, otherwise referred to typically as BPM or beats per minute. So that basically will determine it'll set how fast or slow the song is essentially. Or if you think of like the beat is like if you were to tap your foot to it, it's like how fast are you tapping your foot or how slow are you tapping your foot. One important thing to note is that the slower the BPM, the more time there is for things to groove, particularly with subdivided elements. And we'll talk about like subdivisions and some rhythm theory as well. And just out of curiosity, if you can type in the chat, if you consider yourself to be like really basic when it comes to music theory, or if you have like some sort of solid foundation. Either way, I'm gonna talk about some music theory, rhythm theory basics, just so it doesn't go over anyone's head. But yeah, we'll talk about subdivisions in a moment. And then I'll also show you some project examples where I have tracks that are like 140 BPM and then a track that's like 120 BPM, just to kind of show you the difference in terms of like when things are slower, how it kind of allows things to groove in a different way. Basic, okay, great. Okay, cool. So, and then we'll talk about syncopation. And so when I'm using the word syncopation, what that's referring to is when you accent weak beats or off beats. And later on I'll talk about like what that means, like what is a strong beat, what's a downbeat, and then like what's a weak beat or off beat. But yeah, syncopation is when you accent weak beats or off beats. And it's a really great way in which you can help to create groove. So we'll circle back to that concept a little bit later. And then Yeah, and this is pretty important, but the timing of notes and how elements interact with each other influences the way groove feels. So we'll definitely, yeah, we'll focus on that a lot in terms of just like how you can get all of the different elements to lock in like puzzle pieces in a way where it creates a groove that feels good. One important thing that I'm going to keep coming back to as well is the idea of just keeping it simple. Um, and actually, the first course that we're going to do in the year, we're going to focus on this a lot too, in terms of just like your arrangements, keeping it simple. More notes don't does not. Oh my god, my flu brain is still there. More notes does not necessarily translate to a better groove. A few simple elements can create a good groove based on timing and their interaction with one another. And then we'll come back to this concept as well, just the idea of reference tracks. So basically, a reference track is when you take a song that's done. It's a song that someone else has made, like a mastered song. Um, and you can use it as a reference for a lot of different things. For example, if you're trying to match the mix to a reference track, or if you're like, in this case, if you're trying to create groove, you can focus on using a reference track as a guide to, let's say, lay down a specific drum pattern or rhythm, and or laying down like a certain bass line like rhythm. So using reference tracks, if your ear is having a hard time determining what is good timing, can be a really good thing. Because I think particularly in the beginning, if you're new to production and new to just like creating, let's say, like a drum pattern, I feel like it could be hard to kind of determine what is good timing, which is subjective. But using reference tracks can be helpful, which I'll show later. And then I'll show you also in a moment, a little bit later, in Ableton Live 12 Suite, you can also separate drum stems, basically take the drums out of like a song file, and use the drums in a reference track as a guide, like I mentioned, for drum patterns and timing. So since we're talking about groove, we're going to go ahead and start with the drums. And this is where it's important to kind of like focus on the idea of like, all right, where are certain drum elements in time? Where are they like specifically placed typically? So let's focus on the first thing. So let's start with just like a kick and a backbeat element. And then this is going to link into what I was talking about with strong beats and strong beats and weak beats. So I've got a drum rack here in Ableton Live, which basically just has all of these like drum sounds loaded in. Actually, let me change this to Zoom. And just so we don't blow out your ears, actually, I'm going to turn down the volume of everything a little bit. And if it's ever too loud, just let me know in the chat. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight this and create a little empty MIDI clip here. And oh, that's the wrong one. Let's move that up here. Okay. What I'm going to do is let's focus on just building out a drum pattern first with just like kick and let's say like a clap. So again, I'm just going to build like a dance music, like a house type pattern. And actually before I do that, so typically like in a dance music pattern, you would place a kick on every quarter note. And you know what I like about using a DAW, like basically drawing in notes in a DAW, is you can see on a grid where time is. And so if I right click, I can change this fixed grid to, let's say, quarter notes. And what that means now is it's like every little space that we see here is a quarter note. So if I were to like create let's say like a house pattern, like 4 on the floor drum, like a kick pattern, I'm going to press the B key to turn on the pencil tool. What that would look like is something like that, where there's a kick on every quarter note. So, and right now we're at 120 BPM. Okay, so here's what I mean by strong beats and weak beats. So typically, first of all, let's also talk about just like the idea, the functionality of different like drum sounds. And we talked about this actually in another workshop, but just to kind of recap, the kick tends to be like our foundation. It's like where we, again, if we're like tapping our foot, usually we're like following with what the kick is playing. And the first beat that we're like our ears like subconsciously looking for is beat one, right? So beat one would be like right here. So bar one, very beginning, beat one. If we're looking at quarter notes, this would be beat one, 1.2 is beat two, beat three, beat four, bar two, beat one, beat two, beat three, beat four, right? So I'm just going to do this. I'm going to remove these kicks from beats 2 and 4 just to show you what it sounds like with a kick on beat 1 and beat 3. And without context, kind of sounds pretty boring, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to add, well, before I actually get to that, I'm going to add a backbeat. But let's talk about the concept of like strong beats and weak beats. So strong beat again would be beat 1 is our strongest. Beat 3, I would say it's still pretty strong, but like not as strong as beat 1. And 2 and 4 would also be kind of strong beats, but they're like considered what's called our backbeat. And I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm going to add claps on beats 2 and 4. So like that. Right? It still sounds like pretty basic, but now there's some context between the kick and the clap. So there's kind of this like push-pull type feel, right? So again, without the claps. Now there's some context. The reason why I'm talking about this is when we talk about like adding in all of these other elements, you want to kind of think of like each element has like a particular function and they have a relationship to one another, right? So kick, clap, kick, clap. And by the way, like on beats 2 and 4, that's typically where you place claps, but you can also place like snares here. And, you know, maybe I want to layer these claps and snares together. You can also add like rim hits on beats 2 and 4, right? But yeah, that's typically where you would place those sounds. And oh my God, am I not screen sharing this whole time? Why didn't anyone say anything? This whole time. All right. Thanks for calling it out though. All right, here we go. Can everyone see this now? This is why it's helpful to have a moderator. Okay, thank you. So, okay, since you missed all that, I'm just gonna like quickly go through here just so you can see these slides here. So that way, if you rewatch the video, you can screenshot this if you want. So this is where we talked about groove concepts. And this is when we talked about what is groove, right? Okay. And this is when we talked about the idea of a reference tracks. All right, so let's go back here. So to kind of recap this here. So I added a kick. First of all, I changed the grid here. So right click, change this to fixed grid quarter note. And at first what I did is I added a kick on every quarter note here. And then, so this is like what this would sound like if it was like a dance music track, right? And then what I did is I wanted to show you the concept of strong beats versus weak beats. So strongest beat, beat 1, right? Beat 3 is, you know, pretty strong, but not as strong as beat one. And by the way, in like rock music, the kicks tend to be on beats 1 and 3, played on beats 1 and 3. And then claps tend to be placed on beats 2 and 4. And then I mentioned that you can also add like snares on beats 2 and 4 as well, or maybe like rim shots on beats 2 and 4. Okay. So that kind of catches up visually what we're looking at right now. And this sounds pretty boring, right? So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my like house type pattern. So I'm going to add a kick on every quarter note. And let's do Command D to duplicate this. Select that. Command D. Okay, great. So this is, you know, still like not the most exciting. But this is when we are going to be talking about, we'll talk about nudging notes in a moment, just like adding other elements to kind of have like a certain functionality and create a relationship between these other elements that are here. So, you know, in dance music and actually like even in non-dance music genres, the open hat, which is kind of like an open hat here, tends to be placed on what's called the and beat. So this is where we're going to talk about subdivisions. So a quarter note, right, is if we were to turn on the metronome, would basically be what you hear on every like what's the pulse. So like if I were to count out here. So every time we hear the click, that's basically a quarter note. And that's like keeping the beat of the song. If we were to subdivide quarter notes in half, we would get what's called an eighth note here. So when I select the eighth note grid, we basically get the double the amount of lines here. And it's just basically showing us that this is eighth note, eighth note, eighth note, eighth note. If we were to count this out, typically you would count that out as 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So actually, if I were to add, let's add closed hats like right here. This is what it would sound like. So even without these hats here and with them, you can hear like already it kind of feels a little bit more exciting. There's a little bit more going on. And it kind of feels a little faster. And then if I were to subdivide these again in half, let's change this to a 16th note grid. Now we get 16th note hi-hats. And the way that we would count this out is 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a. And this is what it's going to sound like. That sounds even faster, right? So I know this is like super rudimentary, but I'm showing you these things because they're really important concepts that kind of like help guide us to how to create like better grooves and better patterns that like lock in with one another. So, all right, what we're going to do is add now an open hat on the and beat, which would be, if we were to count this out here, that would be 1, or is the 16th note grade? Okay, so 1 E and, right? And a, 2 E and a. And rather than having to draw this in every time, I'm going to just select the tone here and duplicate that. And we're going to get something like this. So here, like that changes the feel automatically because now we have this like upbeat feeling, which is basically this like open hat that's like opening on every and beat. And let's hear what happens if now I add some closed hats. And rather than adding them on every 16th note, I'm going to play around with just like filling in the space in different places. Okay. So do you hear like that kind of changes the feel a little bit as well? One thing to note that if you use Ableton, I just want to show you something here. Um, One thing to note is that if you use like a preset drum rack, which you can access from the browser by going to drums. So basically, like all of these, say .adg are preset kits. So a lot of them have what's called choking turned on, which basically means that if I click on this little icon down here, click on IO, and then go over here to where it says choke. Do you see how like it says hi-hat 2, 1, hi-hat 4, 1? So basically it just means that they're all on the same channel so that if there's a open hat that's playing and a closed hat is in the same place, it'll actually like mute the other note. And the reason for that is like a real drummer, if they're like basically opening a hat, you typically wouldn't hear a closed hat sound at the same time. So it's trying to like emulate the natural sound of a drummer. However, sometimes I don't want that. So sometimes I'll actually like just turn this off. Um, it just kind of like depends. But I'm gonna do that. I'm just gonna turn it off right now just so you can hear what it sounds like when I create these different patterns, just to hear how like it changes the feel. So now let's hear what happens when I just move these notes around here, add that. So do you hear like it kind of like shifts things around when I move these notes around here? And this kind of goes back to what I was talking about with syncopation, which again, syncopation is just like when you accent weak beats or off beats. So if we're going back to the idea of weak beats and off beats, a weak beat, typically like the weakest beats would be the in-between notes, meaning that if we count one E, so the 16th note right here, E and would be like an upbeat, but it's like weak. And then an so E and would be like the weakest beats. And you can create some like really interesting patterns just from like adding syncopation. And by the way, we haven't talked about like accents yet, which is basically when a note is louder than another. So right now, all of our notes are the exact same volume, but I am kind of just like playing around with the idea of like moving these notes around here. And kind of just like playing around with syncopation, where it's like one E, E, right? This is a downbeat, but then and. So you can kind of play around with that. So let me just, I'm going to duplicate that. Okay. So let's see here. So open hats on and beats, and then you can add in syncopated elements. And, you know, by the way, you can, those are closed hats I added in here, but let's maybe add some toms on also syncopated beats. So what is this, an and here, and then right? So that's kind of like a syncopated pattern here. Let's just duplicate that and add like this type of thing. Okay, so you can also add like, what is this? Like a stick, where did the stick go? Rim. Yeah, let's add this like, I'm actually gonna move these to the end of, I think bar 4 or 2. Yeah. Right here. There you go. Okay. So that's kind of the idea of just like adding these like syncopated hits. And then, it kind of sounds like pretty stale or just like mechanical and very on the grid. So we're going to, I think it's, where did I put it? Nudging notes here. Drums. Okay, I might have added it. I forgot where I added it. It's fine. So basically, like, this is like very on the grid, meaning that if we zoom in, these are like, these notes are very, very on the grid. And so one thing that you can do, there's like two things that you can do to kind of like get things to feel like a little bit more natural, maybe groove a little bit more, is the idea of playing around with the timing. And so like nudging notes essentially. And so what I mean by that is like what I could do is even with just the claps here, I'm going to select all of the notes by just clicking here and maybe just like shifting them a little bit behind the grid here. Okay, and I just want you to hear how the timing changes as I move this even farther back. Right? Now that sounds off. But if I move it like here, here, and it might not even be like that perceivable by the ear, but what you're doing essentially is just like shifting the timing a little bit, where it's like if a human plays this or claps, a lot of times they're not going to be like right on the beat. They might be a little bit ahead or a little bit behind, and like keeping that in mind, like you might like move one a little bit ahead and then the other one a little bit behind. And like with timing, the way that I think about it is just like with, drum patterns and bass lines and things like that. It's just, it's the timing and feel of things. Really, what it is just where something is, where a sound is relative to where another sound is. And that's just going to change the way that you perceive how it feels. And you can do that with like nudging notes like that. Another thing that you can do to make things feel a little bit more natural is just playing around with velocities. And can anyone just tell me in the chat, just so it doesn't feel like I'm talking just to myself, what velocities are as I take the sip of water? Anybody? Anybody? And if you don't know, that's okay. You also might just be typing. Anyone? Let me just make sure that this is also still working. Okay, great. So yeah, how loud or soft the instrument hit is exactly. So think of it like if I'm playing drums and I'm hitting a snare, how hard, if I like hit it harder with more force, it's going to be louder. If I hit it softly, it's going to be a softer or less loud sound. So right now this sounds really unnatural because literally all of the notes are exactly the same volume. So one thing I can do is play with the velocities, and there's like a couple of different ways you can do that in Ableton. One way is just to select the note, go down here, and then drag these bars up and down. I find it's a little bit easier if you just, right now, first of all, I have the pointer, meaning that if I press B, I can get the pencil tool, press it again, I just get the normal cursor. So I want to get the normal cursor so that I can select a note and then hold down the command key, which will give me those up and down arrows, and then just drag this. So with this, I can basically like change what's accented, meaning that the notes that are the loudest, where the velocity is higher, are our accented notes. And we can tell based upon the color here. So if I zoom in here, do you see how like this is less green than that? It's like a darker green. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to like change these accents here, just to hear how that's going to change the way things feel. And yeah, let's change that. That. Sure. Sure. Okay, so I might even just solo the hats just so you can hear how that changes sound here. Yeah, let's just solo that. So let me do this right now. Let's just make these all the same now, same velocity. Hear the difference between that and this, right? It's a little bit more, just like a little bit more human feel to it, but then also like when you accent notes, it literally changes the feel of it. And that's actually something that really like unlocked something for me. My production journey is when I started playing around with velocities of hi-hats. It made me realize like, oh, this is actually a really powerful way in which I can essentially just change the feel of something by literally changing the velocities. So just to kind of show you here in a really more obvious way here, if I had like straight 16th hi-hats like that, I'm just going to play around. Let's accent the and beats here. Toot. Just so you can hear how that can change the feel. Okay, so, right, versus now I'm going to accent the E beat here. E, 1E, okay, 1E. You hear like that kind of like subtly like changes the way that things feel. So yeah, playing with velocities can be like a really great way to kind of just like automatically change the feel of something. Okay, so changing the timing, nudging notes is a great way which you can change the feel of something, and then also adjusting velocities as well. And then also adding ghost notes can be really helpful. So basically, ghost notes are extra notes that are often added on syncopated hits or like a hit that's like right before the downbeat. So you hear this like pretty commonly with, let's say, like kicks, otherwise known as ghost kicks. So they can help to add syncopation and sometimes, and then also to break up the repetition in a pattern. So I'm going to do this actually. I'm going to duplicate this clip and get rid of these kicks. Yeah. Just so it's like only a kick on beats 1 and 3. Okay. And then I'm going to do this. I'm going to add, let's unmute that. Okay, that's kind of cool. So what I'm going to do is just like add a kick on, let's say, the and beat right here. Or actually, instead of playing this kick on beat 3, let's add it here. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is add a little kick here before beat 3, like right here. And just to kind of emphasize that, we're going to get rid of, where are the toms here? And get rid of, actually, it's not in here. Okay. Let's get rid of these toms. So this right here would be like our ghost kick here, because it's like kind of like leading us into like beat 3 here, or I could add it actually like right here before maybe like bar 3. So that's our ghost kick. And we could like, it doesn't have to be a kick. We could maybe make that like a tom, right? Um, cool. So adding ghost notes can be cool. And then we're gonna talk about like adding bass here, but one thing I wanted to show you, and I'm almost like hesitant to show you because for my students that I teach at a certain school, I feel like when I show them this, they just default to this and then don't even use their ears sometimes as far as what it sounds like. And it's called Ableton Groove, and it can sometimes it can be helpful. But you know, with creating these patterns, like creating feel, I feel like you always need to use your ears. Just clicking on a button, you can't always rely on that, right? You have to like use your ears. Um, but it can be a cool thing depending upon how you use it. So basically what it does what I just showed you in terms of just like nudging notes and adjusting velocities, except it does it automatically. And so if I go here where it says groove, I can click on this arrow here, and this opens up the browser. And what we're looking at here are basically like these grooves that, if you think about it this way, so on drum machines, like classic drum machines, there was usually some sort of like knob that was titled like swing that basically would just like nudge notes a certain way. So like if let's go, I think my favorite ones are like where is it? They changed the 1200s are cool. So 1200 is actually a drum machine. And then here, the MPC 3000. So, and by the way, these numbers here, so the 16th, 8th or 16th, it just means that it's going to swing it to the nearest 8th or 16th note. And that actually brings me to the topic of swing, which, interaction, where did I add the swing? I forgot where I added it, but maybe it's over here. No, maybe I didn't add it here. So basically, the concept of swing is that the notes are swung to the nearest, like usually like the nearest 8th or 16th note. And this is what it's referring to here, 8th or 16th. And then these other numbers here just determines like how intense that swing is. And so to make this really obvious, I'm going to choose 8th because basically it's just going to move the notes farther. It's going to move up to the nearest 8th note. And then I'm going to choose 74 because it's going to be, so it's kind of got this feel here. I'm going to double click. So now we're going to see that down here. And let's just hear what this sounds like. Right? That sounds all sorts of messed up right now. But let's say if we had like straight ahead hi-hats here, like on the, let's say 8th notes. Let's add them like here. Right, you can really hear that. So yeah, that's what basically just singing it to the nearest 8th note. And by the way, if you go to view and then groove pool, this shows up over here. So this is where I said it's important to use your ears because I think by default, Ableton sets this to like 0% global amount, which basically means that nothing is happening. Nothing's being applied. And as I add this in, it's just going to make it more intense. You can kind of play with the global amount here. 100%, it's just going to be more intense. And then you can change like these settings here. So timing, we'll just like maybe fix the timing. And then like here it says 0 velocity, which means that it's not adjusting any velocities actually. But if I do that, it's gonna automatically adjust velocities. But let's hear what this sounds like with maybe like a 16th note swing. it kind of still sounds a little messed up. Maybe let's turn that down. Let's adjust the velocity percentage here. And if we want to see like what it's actually doing to these notes here, I can click on this arrow to commit what I just did, click here, and then you can see the notes actually adjust to kind of just show you what it's doing. So, you know, again, I'm only showing you this to show you that there is a feature in Ableton Live that will allow you to basically adjust the things automatically that I was showing you, that I was talking about. I don't know if I would always recommend it for every situation, but it is something that does exist. Otherwise, you can just literally just use your ears and then just like adjust things manually, which is what I often do. And then another thing that you can do that I do a lot of the time is use like a reference track. And the way that I do that is just by dragging in, let's say this here, and let's actually do that again. Hold on, let me do that. Okay. There we go. Okay, so what is this? Is 136. Okay, so I'm going to change this to 136 BPM. And we're just going to, I'm not going to really talk about warping too much since this is not that type of workshop, but I'm just going to make this in time with the grid. So this is the kick right here. I'm going to warp this, turn on Complex Pro, and then find where the first kick is, the first beat, beat one, which is like right here, right click, and set 1-1 here. So if I turn on the metronome, it's a little bit off. Oh, I changed this by accident. 136. There we go. And let's make sure that this says 136 as well. Right click, set 1-1 here. There we go. Okay, so this can be helpful because if you're like, I want to create like within this genre and like have like a specific type of timing. So let's find. Okay, so here's what's cool is in Ableton Live 12, I can basically right click on this clip here, separate stems to new audio tracks. And then we're going to select drums and click on separate. And what that's going to do is it's essentially just going to extract just like the drums. So that way we'll be able to see specifically where on the grid certain notes are placed, like the kicks, maybe the claps and things like that. So again, if you're trying to create within a certain genre and trying to like replicate a certain feel, this can be pretty helpful. And it's something that I've been doing pretty frequently as of late. Yeah, so let me, and just because it takes time, I'm just going to show you how this typically works, and then I'm going to start opening up some projects to show you a very specific examples, essentially. Okay, so here are our drums. It sounds like a little weird because it's kind of what happens when you separate stems. It's a little bit of, doesn't sound exactly like the original, but you can get a pretty good idea. So we can see here on a grid what's happening. So this is a kick. So if I wanted to replicate that, let me just do like 1, 2, 3, 4 bars. Okay. So if I wanted to replicate this, I can basically follow maybe like what the kick is doing. And usually like looking at waveforms, you can usually tell what the kick is. So because the kick usually is kind of like beefy looking like this. So 1, 2. So it's probably going to be on every, probably every quarter note, to be honest. So 1, 1, 2. So 1, 2. So actually, I could probably just fill it in space here. And then we got some other stuff going on. So we've got this like little open hat here, and I would probably want to replace the samples I have in here if I'm trying to replicate this type of sound with whatever the samples are kind of sounding like in this drum kit, but we don't have to. But like, let's see, we can see on the grid here, one and, and. Okay, so then that means that we could add our open hat. It's not like super open, so maybe let's add it like one and right here. And we can see that here actually, so this kind of lines up. And we can see this here. There's like multiple little hats that are happening right here. So what is it? 17, 2, 3. It's like boom, boom. And I probably like have different sounds here. And what's cool about this too is you can kind of like see on the grid. So like this is actually like not that 16th notes here. Like that. Yeah. And kind of just like see if maybe like a note is off the grid, meaning that like you can actually see this 16th note here. It kind of like starts here. So you can do something like that. And my best guess is, because this is like pretty frequent and pretty common in like UKG, is there's probably some like triplet 8th or 16th note action happening. And so in Ableton, what I can do is just right click here, change this to triplet grid, right? And so this will actually give us like a triplet 16th note action. So, and we can actually see that here is as soon as I change to a triplet grid, this last note here that was like basically the last little 16th note before beat 3 is on a like triplet, is basically a triplet 16th. So let me do that again. I'm going to change this, turn the triplet grid off. So this is a regular 16th note grid, and then I basically adjusted this MIDI note so that it's more in line with where this little hat is in the reference track, and then I changed this to a 16th note grid, triplet grid, and we can see that it's lining up. So this is kind of cool because it teaches us about timing if we use a reference track. And it's, I don't know, the nerd in me just like really loves doing stuff like this because it just, yeah, it allows me to kind of, it's like a little bit of ear training, and then you can use it, like you have like an actual grid that you can look at, which I think is helpful. Okay, so we're not going to replicate this because this would take too long, but I just wanted to show you that is something that you can do. So let's mute this here. All right, so we've got this guy here. And we haven't even added a bass line yet, but we'll talk about patterns in a moment, breaking up those patterns, but let's add bass. So here's the thing about bass is if you are creating something for the dance floor, I would say that in my experience, usually like having very simple bass lines and basically using less notes and having, if you were thinking like a bass player playing something, if you had a bass player like playing a really busy bass line versus just like kind of riding the same note and then going to a different note and going back to that note, I find that the less notes that you dial in, it tends to groove a little bit better in the dance floor. Again, I'm going to open up a couple of projects in a moment just to show you some different examples. And then like shorter notes versus like held down legato notes tend to be funkier. And then just some other concepts here. The bass tends to follow the kick in terms of timing. And let's actually go back to these things after we do this. But yeah, so what I'm going to do is we've got, and one other thing I'm going to show you too is you don't have to overthink it. In fact, I encourage you not to overthink it, but you can literally just layer in, and I'll show you again some project examples in just a moment. I do this all the time, where you can just like honestly layer in some loops. So let's do just some tops. And I don't even know what I've got here. What do I have? Let's find something that's like kind of syncopated. Like MJ Cole has some really nice loops. I don't know. I already have some like syncopated stuff going different timings, so this might not work, but let's just hear what it sounds like. I'm gonna turn this way down. Actually, let's find like a shaker. Shaker. Sure. Okay. And this is also something I do pretty often too, is I just double click on the audio clip and I change this to say like 16th note. Select this first option here and basically just lower the envelope so that it just becomes tighter. I might want to raise the volume just a little bit. So versus, so just tightens it up a little bit. Let's just hear if it actually goes. I'm going to turn off these hats for a moment here. Okay, so let's add a bass line. Let's see here, Shift Command M. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is we're just gonna like create in G minor or something like that. So I can set the scale here. Let's click on scale just so it only shows us the notes are in here in this scale. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play with what we have going on here. Okay, and actually let me hear what this sounds like without the shaker. I like that better. All right, we'll just go with just that. And then, so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna like kind of have the bass follow what the kick is doing, but like play with like syncopation. So maybe have like the first note play on the and beat and make sure we play down here. Ooh, just got warm in here all of a sudden. All right, so okay. For the sake of time, just because I'm going to add a little different hat pattern here. Let's do. So let's do and beats. Lower this. So, I mean, what you could do, and actually, I might just like open up some projects. Actually, yeah, that shows you a good example or a better example of the baseline that I made. But like typically what I do is I just like pick the key and then usually like play with like syncopation. And when I talk about syncopation, I just mean that like maybe I'll have like the first note come on like beat one, but like if there's space, then I like to have kind of like the bass like fill that space. So it's just like kick plays on beat one and then maybe like the bass plays like on the and beat here. So actually let me do this. Just because right now my post flu brain cannot really come up with a baseline on the spot. But it's okay. So I'm gonna do just save that here. Let's open up this project here. 10. Okay. So while this is opening, does anyone have any questions so far? No questions? Okay. So I'm opening up a project that I basically made this, and I would say for like the most part, the majority of it in like 30 minutes. Which really speaks to just like how simple things can be. Um, so to not blow out your ears, let's see. Okay, so that's off. All right, I'm going to turn this down, turn that stuff off, and here we go. Okay, I'm not gonna play this whole thing here, but I just want to show you the basically how all of the elements are interacting. And it goes back to what I was saying about how basically each element plays a certain role, right? So if we look at the kick here, kick is on every quarter note. And then we've got this clap here, right? By itself, not that exciting. But then we've got this, where's the open hat? We've got this hat. There we go. So basically an open hat on every and beat. And then I added in this other hat here, this like closed hat on, it's kind of acting like a ghost note, I guess, but it's more like adding syncopation on, let's see here, after beat two, bar two, two, E and so on the beats. Is that right? So it just makes things like a little bit more interesting. And then this is, oh, I didn't even add in a drum layer, percussive layer actually. So it's just this. And then with the bass, let's see what the bass is doing. Okay, this is what I was talking about. So this is a really good example of just like how little your bass line needs to do to like kind of just like feel groovy or feel funky. So you can see that like each, so here we are, I guess like F sharp minor here, and we've got, this is 16th note grid, so basically F sharp on the and beat, so one E and so kick is on beats 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is what I was saying about like how the kick and the bass are kind of like alternating. The you know, and do you see how like these notes, it's predominantly on like F sharp, but then it goes up to A and it walks down to G sharp, back down to F sharp. And then it goes back to A, G sharp. So super, super simple. This is basically just like a 2-bar bass line that repeats. Um, and yeah, and then you can see here it says and then this A here is on the 16th note before beat 4. Right? So it's just, the way that I think about music making is they're just like little puzzle pieces that should fit together. They each have a role, they each have a function, and you always want to pay attention to like how they fit together. And right here, this is like a super simple project that there's really not that much going on. There might be some like rhythmic vocal parts that are happening a little bit later. When I add it. I added in this little drum loop here. Okay. There's like, yeah, here in this drop. Motherfucking bitch. Yeah. Oh, right here. It's like this little rhythmic thing. Cool. So I just want to show you this to kind of demonstrate that things can be really, really simple and you can create a groove with just like a few simple elements. And it's just like how they interact with one another is how you can create the groove. And then I'm going to open up a project now that is a little bit more complex. There's a little bit more going on. But yeah, I feel like I think it's actually a really good challenge, a good exercise to basically just like create a really simple song with like 3 elements and see if you can get them to groove well with one another. And if you want to like break up the repetition, there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. With here, I feel like vocal, if you have a vocal, is the easiest way to do that. So like this is just like the main idea here, right? Right? It just like now it just changes like the phrase is like different here. And then we have these like other little rhythmic parts that come in. Right? So you can just like basically just like create a variation on an idea to kind of like break up the repetition. Yeah, let's go ahead and open this song that I've been working on this week that I started a long time ago, but am determined to finish. I think it's in this one here, Lonely. Yeah. Okay, so while that's opening, let's go over here. Okay, so yeah, when I say like shorter notes, actually, what we just played right now is going to contrast the bass line in this song that I'm opening right now, this project I'm opening right now. So in the song I just showed you, the notes are pretty short, meaning that they're like 8th or like 16th note long notes. And with shorter notes, they can feel funkier because it also will inform like which kind of like bass sound you'll choose. But it just like allows you to like play kind of like syncopated type bass lines. So with that particular bass line, it was playing on the and beats, right? And then like the like the 16th notes. And so you can kind of create like funkier bass lines with that versus like if you hold down just like notes for a long time, usually that feel like less funky. Okay, and we'll talk about this in a moment. Okay. So let's take a look at this here. So again, I think I'm going to turn that off and turn this stuff down just so it's not super loud.
Shut down. I'm lonely when you leave the lights on. When you leave the lights
Okay. So this is pretty different from the other song. And by the way, like the other song I just showed you, I literally did not adjust any velocities or adjust notes. They're just like already on the grid, but I just think it works like it doesn't sound like Ableton drew in the notes. It doesn't sound super mechanical. So, which is why I was just like, okay, it sounds good. If it sounds good, it sounds good in the club. That's how you know it works. With this one, I did a little bit more tweaking. So let's see what's going on. So I've got, again, just like a 4 on the floor kick here. And actually, let's go to this little intro here. Having it play kind of this like broken beat type of thing where it's like we still have a kick on every quarter note, but then I added these little other kicks on the and beats to kind of create like this pattern. Okay, let's add in, what do we have here? Claps and like a stick rim hit that are playing at the same time on beats 2 and 4. Oh, and a snare. You can actually see here, I did actually play with the velocities a little bit. And as well as the timings. See how these are not like right on the grid? And I guess I added some groove too until I kind of dialed in the feel that I wanted. And then I layered in some loops here. In addition to this hats loop. This is the trick I was showing you where I like basically shortened the envelope just so it didn't sound super busy. Keeps it a little bit tighter. One thing I do want to kind of caution if you are going to be layering in a lot of loops is just making sure that, particularly when they're like a hats loop or a shaker loop, making sure that the timing of things work together. Sometimes they just don't. Even when I shorten the envelope, it's just like the timing of where the hits are in the particular loop. It just doesn't really align with what I had drawn in, word played in. So just like something to keep in mind. And then, yeah, as far as, see, this is a drop here. And then this is where the bass is very different in this song because I basically just have a sustained sub. So there's like really long notes that play per bar, and then a re-space. So I won't be able to hear the sub on Zoom. And then I have this bass line here, which is a little bit, I guess, like shorter notes here. It's more of acting more like a lead. Cool. So the bass with all of the drums sound like this. Cool. Yeah, so that's just totally different feel where, I kind of like used a combination of drawing in notes and then like also um using like percussive loops and things like that. And then yeah, a couple things I want to talk about. So this just like making sure that you create space for the kick. So if we're talking about groove, particularly like with dance music, the low end, dialing in what's called the low end is probably like one of the most important things that you can do, because if the low end doesn't hit, it's very hard to feel the groove. So usually like we're like on the dance floor, really impacted by the way that like the kick and the bass are hitting. And so like with this particular song, I spent a long time this week trying to dial it in because it just like it wasn't hitting. So a couple of things that I wanted to note is one, sometimes it's just the wrong kick. In this case, it was like I was struggling with just like finessing the bass this week, and then I realized that I just needed a different kick. And what I mean by that is we've been talking more about like timing, right? But if we're talking about the idea of groove, as producers, I feel like inevitably mixing does kind of come into play with just like getting it to sound the way that we want, right? And so it's really good to kind of familiarize yourself with the idea of like frequencies and where certain sounds like sit in the frequency spectrum. And so what I mean by that is like if we have a longer bass, right? So in this case, I have this sub bass here. And if we look at this spectrum here, okay, so this is basically showing us what frequencies are present in the sub, which is going to be around like 50 hertz right here. And then we have a respace, which shows us that it's probably, I think it's like around 100 hertz is the fundamental frequency. And then we have these harmonics sitting here, right? So it's taking up specific space. And because I have a sub, I made sure that when I was EQing it, that I cut completely anything below, let's say like 75 hertz, which would be the sub area. So I'm like carving out space. And then I have this other bass here that's also EQ'd well below like 462 hertz. So again, this is like a little bit technical, but I'm just showing you this to kind of just show you like all of the sounds that you choose are important because they kind of determine the way that things feel, right? So if I have a longer bass that takes up more space, when I say longer, it's like actually playing for a longer period of time. I want to show you a cool tool that I found like a couple years ago, called Vision 4X. And what this is going to show us is where the bass and the kick are. So right now there's no kick. Right now I'm only soloing the basses. So these are frequencies going up and down. So this is basically telling us that this is probably the sub right here. Sub is like around 50 hertz and then going up to like 70 hertz. So this actually might be overlap with like the respace. And then we have is actually mainly that like respace here, 100 hertz. And then these are like the harmonics. And then if I add in the kick, let's see what happens. Okay, cool. So this is our kick right here. And this is important because at first I had a different kick. Actually, I think I had like this one, maybe PL. Let's just change it for a moment. Yeah, I had this one, and it sounds very different, right? It kind of like masks the low end, but if we look at this, see how it's like kind of smearing into here, versus there we go, like a little bit more separation. So why am I showing you this? This is just to show you that the reason why this kick is different is one, the tail is a little bit shorter, meaning that the like how long the kick is playing is like shorter, and it has like less sustain of the like sub frequency, which is like 50 hertz or whatever. So that's just really all to show you that the sounds that you pick are important, particularly for like the kick and the bass, because they determine the way that the low end will hit, but also the way that the groove will feel. So just like some things to keep in mind as you are building out your songs. Um, and then also side chain could be really helpful. Side chaining is basically the concept where if you have like kick and bass, you can basically side chain the bass to the kick, so that essentially like the volume of the bass will lower or duck whenever the kick is present. And so you can actually do that with compressor, Ableton compressor. Um, it lets you choose your source, which in this case it could be the kick, and then actually I think I chose a different kick here, but it's this one. So basically it'll just like duck every time the bass is playing. But I actually finally got this plugin this week, Kickstart, which basically it's not like super precise to be honest, but it lets you, it's just basically like a sidechain tool where again I'm just like sidechaining the bass to the kick. So this is like what it sounds like. Right? Kind of hear this like pumping sensation, and it just like creates space for the kick, which again in turn allows us to groove a little bit more. Um, One thing I wanted to note, which is honestly one of the most important things that you can learn, is just that idea of using space. Using silence and space allows the groove to breathe. So you don't have to fill out all of the space, right? Silence is music. Uh, I would say like space actually becomes more important the faster your BPMs get. So if you're like producing at like 140 or 150 BPM, using space can be really important, and it actually means that like your bass lines actually will probably be less busy. Um, but yeah, you can use silence in conjunction with syncopated notes to establish groove. And so it's kind of like what's happening here, right? So if I were to fill out all of these 16th notes, this would sound so different, right? In combination with playing everything else, it would just would sound like really chaotic. You can actually see like right here too. This used to be a note that was there, but then I muted it because I felt that it just sounded too busy and it was like kind of conflicting with like another note of a different element that was playing. You can see that here as well. So again, I just like to like use space and then like make sure all the elements fit together like puzzle pieces. Um, Another rhythmic element I have in this track is actually these stutter chords here. And what I'm doing is I'm actually automating the LFO. And they just like, long story short, the LFO is like kind of like an invisible hand that is modulating or turning the filter cutoff. So it's making the sound brighter or darker. And it's changing the rate in which it's doing it. So it starts at like eighth notes, goes to like fast 16ths, and goes to 14th notes. I'm actually like, using LFO to kind of like change the feel of it and kind of like change the groove a little bit. And again, like these elements here, they all, it's like I'm not like layering them just like haphazardly. Like they have to like fit together, right? And so one thing I like to do is to like solo elements together to make sure that they like lock in. And if like maybe things start getting feeling chaotic, then I'll maybe mute like some notes or just like completely remove an idea until it feels like the elements are like locking in. They just like they have to lock in as puzzle pieces and making sure that I'm like using space and um that I'm not like not filling in all of the blank space just because it I feel like it. um yeah, so interaction between elements. Groove is established. As mentioned, groove is established from elements interacting. Each element should lock in with each other like little puzzle pieces. This is like a big one. This is why I like to solo things together. If I have a feeling that things are too chaotic or too busy, are any elements overlapping in a way where it masks each other, disrupts the groove? And if that's the case, I'll usually just like delete stuff or mute things. Yeah, and good question. Are they leaving space for one another? Um, Yeah, and I'm going to open up another project, but I wanted to, yeah, talk about this idea. So, groove, I think of kind of like timing, spacing between elements, and then energy energy can kind of define as like perceived intensity. So, it can be how many elements are playing, but it can also be defined by what frequencies are present. So and I will say that like a lot of the times energy, if there's more energy in a song or parts of this like a certain song section, it's usually because there's like low frequencies or sub frequencies, which tends to feel like there's more energy. But yeah, adding more elements can increase energy and make the groove less clear. So this is what I was talking about space. If you add too many things and they don't like lock in together, it can make it feel like it grooves less. So removing elements can make the groove more apparent sometimes, which because you're creating basically more space between hits. And then making groove consistent between sections. In busier sections, rather than adding a bunch of competing ideas, add layers that support the groove. So actually, that's kind of like what I did here. Is rather than just like adding new ideas, is I just like literally am supporting what's happening here. Honestly, I think there might be a little bit too much sidechaining for this. Right? But like this bass line here, it's just kind of like it's playing the same notes. It's like playing the root notes, but then it's just like emphasizing some of the rhythms. Right? And a lot of times what you'll hear in like layering in electronic music is just like literally a lot of instruments playing the same idea. So it might be like the same melody, playing the same rhythm, but then it's just like sitting in different parts of the frequency spectrum or they're like EQ'd in a certain way so that they're like layered together like a sandwich. But yeah, so rather than adding like a bunch of competing ideas, you can literally just like have a bunch of instruments playing the same idea. Question: when you're layering drum parts in, is there an order that's recommended to increase momentum? Okay, can you maybe clarify what your question is? When you're layering drum parts in, is there an order? I think I'm confused by the word order. Are you trying to like just like add more energy to like a certain part of the song? I mean, I'll just show you here like what I did with like this arrangement. So this is the intro. Different pieces of the drum kit, like kick first and then hi-hat. Oh, okay. So there's no rules, first of all. You can do whatever you want. I will say, kind of going back to what I was saying about low frequencies carry more energy. So, like sometimes, like in dance music, sometimes there will be no kick in the beginning, and it'll just be like the like higher frequency sounds like hi-hats. So, like for example, right? Or it could be like you're filtering everything. So you could like add basically like, let's do this. I don't normally do this, but where you just like filter out the low frequencies like that in the intro. Then over the span of like 16 bars, bring this back in. But to answer your question, like typically as far as like if you're trying to like change, like create contrast in your song and like change energy throughout, um, keep in mind that low frequencies have the most energy. So you either want to like filter out low frequencies of the kick and or just like completely remove the kick from sections where you want there to be less energy. Open hats also tend to have more energy. So like maybe in the intro, we don't really hear a lot of open hat, but then in the drop, you hear that open hat, right? It's just like, and technically what I could do is I can make this open hat even bigger, like more open. Like this is not a very open hat. Let me see if I might not have one in this kit, but here's an example. 909 open. Like that's a really open hat. That's kind of like obnoxiously like really open. Um, let's get rid of that. But yeah, if you wanted like let's say a section like a drop to just like feel like bigger, then having like a more open hat can be helpful or just like having open hat in general like because this is like more of like kind of like a stutter housey UKG-ish type feel. I didn't want like a super open hat because it's not really like that's not really within that style. But you can hear that like in this like more intro section, I don't really have any sort of open hat, right? Except for in the drop I do. And then another thing that you can do is going back to what I was saying earlier, it's just like adding subdivided elements, like subdivided, let's say like 16th notes, like maybe 16th note hats, because it'll make it feel like there's more energy. It almost like will make it feel like it's like faster. So like, I don't know, this here, right? Um, yeah, you can now like it just like add more like layers if you want to. But yeah, just like hearing the difference between just like these intro parts and the drop. And honestly, it doesn't like sound that crazy. It's just that like the open hat gives it like I just realized I don't have this with the kick, but it just like gives it a little bit more energy. And then I just like layered in these other like loops here. Like that part here. There's this yeah, and then in the breakdowns, let's hear what the drums are doing. So I have this, and by the way, like in breakdowns, what you could do is then remove, at least in the first part of the breakdown, if you're creating like a dance track, is removing the low frequencies, um, and just like filtering stuff out, because again, that changes the energy, right? So I removed the kick in the breakdown, and then with these claps here, I'm like filtering out these like higher frequencies because without it, it sounds like this. So imagine if I were to just play this to the
Deeper in a darkness.
that doesn't sound good. But with like this.
In a darkness. You leave the lights on. We're fading deeper in a darkness.
You hear how like even I think in this like section leading up to the first breakdown, I don't even really have that much bass. I think I have like a sub. I have a respace. I don't even have the sub in yet. And I'm like basically filtering. Am I doing? Yeah, in the bass group, I'm filtering out the sub frequencies. But still going into the breakdown, there's still a slight change in energy. Because I have like, I'm basically like muting out cutting out some of those like higher frequencies of the clap. There's like less elements. There's like elements that have a lot of reverb in it on them, so that like kind of fill out the space. And then when the buildup happens,
Leave the lights on. I'm lonely when you
hear how like the energy changes there, and that is because the sub comes in. We get more of like the low frequencies, and then with the drums, I know this is not really referring specifically to groove, but with the drums, we've got some builds happening. So like and filtering, automated filtering.
leave the
Cool. Does that answer your question though, in terms of just like creating dynamic contrast in sections? Yeah, it's just like choosing which elements are there, and the easiest way to do that, to be honest, is just like removing the kick or like automating, like filtering out the low frequencies of the kick and then bringing it back in moments where you want there to be more energy, and then like having a more open hat come in sections will also like give it more energy as well. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna show you like a totally different example of a track that is a slower BPM and a different style. Let's do, I think it's this one. Yeah. So this is a song I think is pretty cool. It's a track that I started with Le Chauve, who collaborates pretty frequently with LPGOP. Super, super talented. So fun to collab with. And this one is a fun one because we played a lot of stuff in, which is another reason why I wanted to show you this project. So like the examples I gave are like basically tracks where I drew everything in for the most part. With this one, we played in the bass line on a synth bass and layered in like actual like percussion that we played in, recorded playing in, and layered that in with like MIDI percussion that I drew in, MIDI notes I drew in. So, what I'm gonna do is play the actual audio file just because he shared the project with me and there are certain plugins I don't have, so it's gonna sound weird in the project. But so hopefully this is not super loud. It might be a little bit loud. Sorry. I don't know how to control it from here. But this is actually, you know what? I could do it. play this whole track because it's very long. But I wanted to pay attention to a couple things. So we were just talking about it, just the idea of like creating contrast, and how like different drum sounds tend to signify or translate to like certain types of energy or energy in general. So there was a certain section, I think, leading up into that first groove section where the kick thing thins out, meaning that it's like the kick. I should actually go maybe to the project here, where it's just like basically the low frequencies are automated, filtered out. So let me see if it shows it. Yeah. So EQ8. Yeah. So right here. Loud, huh? That's hot EQ utility. See that? See how it gets like thinner? Yeah. That's like a really cool way in which you can just like kind of change the energy is by filtering out those low frequencies here. But yeah, let's take a look at what's happening like groove wise. So again, kick on every quarter note. Um, and then we've got the snare. And then these are these like just straight ahead drawn in hats. And this is what I was talking about these are eighth note hats, no, 16th note hats, where the velocities change, right? So it changes like the feel of it. And this is cool. So this is like now we have an actual hat that was hit, that was recorded. So a live hat. Play this by itself. That feels like a little bit more natural because it actually is natural. It was like actually played. There's this like other little kick accent here. We've got these cowbells here. This like high and low pitch cowbell. So to me, this is like where the groove comes in. And this goes back to what we were talking about in regards to syncopation, right? So we do have a hit on beat one, strong beat, but then we've got, let's change the 16 note grid. So one, E and So one, two, E and. So if we were to say this out loud, one, and one, and then four, beat four, and. Cool. So we've got these like syncopated hits that kind of like help to create a bit of a groove. And then this bass line, again, it's pretty simple bass line where it's like writing the same notes essentially, like it's playing the same notes, but then it kind of just like maybe walks up, walks down. See how there's space here? It's like space. It's not like there's not like a bass note playing like at every 8th or 16th note. We've got like space and then syncopation. I don't like think of it like these elements are just like really talking to each other. Yeah, they all like again like lock in like little puzzle pieces, and then we get this clave that's playing another syncopated idea. Right? Cool. So, and as these sections go on, then you can maybe like make us like a section more energetic by adding like, what do we got over here? We've got like a shaker loop, 16th shaker loop, and then a 16th tambourine. And that's the other thing you asked me about, like energy, right? Or like if you want to increase momentum. So there's a difference, I think, between momentum and energy, but like tambourines, because they're higher frequencies, tend to have like more energy. They're also just like, because you're shaking it, it just like feels more energetic. But then also, if you play 16th note like pattern, in general, that's just going to feel like there is more momentum. Right? Cool. But yeah, that's the idea there. Um, yeah, and I think I'm just going to play or open up one more project as like a quick little example. Um, and this is not even like a real song that I made. It's just like something that I made for a class I was teaching. But it's a good example of something where I think I used a reference track, I want to say, for that. Yeah, any other questions? Um, So actually, I used a Justin J. Rodney Dinkles track for this reference. Oh, sorry. So loud. The limiter's on here. Let's turn this down. So I don't even remember. I might have just used it as a reference for the like creating the arrangement, but let's see what's going on here. So kick, and this is like basically my 909 kit. So it's like the rest of the sounds. A cool trick I want to show you if you use Ableton is if I double click on this clip here on this 909 track, and if I want to see like the kick is on a separate track. And if I want to see these notes at the same time as these notes, I can just hold, I already selected this clip. I'm going to hold down the shift key and then click on this clip. And it's going to let me see basically all of these notes at the same time. And if I click on fold, it'll isolate these notes here. So we can see here's the kick. And I don't know why these are not labeled, but oh, I think I have to do this. Yeah, go like that. So kick, hi-hat, clap, yeah, low hat, hi-hat. So you can see like where all the notes are, basically. Cool. And I think this is, I'm not even sure. Yeah, I used a triplet grid here. Again, 16th triplet grid. So this is how I placed these notes here in accordance to this like little triplet grid. And I think I might, yeah, I might have used, I can't remember. I might have used these drums here as a reference. But yeah, and then I layered in this drum loop here. And you see how like the feel of this, the swing of this, they match each other. So this is why this drum loop works. And then let's see. Then I have this little bouncy bass here, which is you know, and I could have probably adjust the timing of some of these notes, but I created this really quickly because I was basically recording a screen recording demo for class. But you can see again, I think this is in this section here, this bass line is just writing one note and then it changes, it follows this like chord progression when it gets here. Cool. So you can see it's playing on the and beat, walks down, goes up, goes down, and then it's playing like this little 16th note here. So, and you can see like how I like shifted some of the timing to kind of just like get the feel that I wanted. I guess I used groove a little bit. Yeah, I might have just honestly used that as like to demo. But I used a combination of just like my ear to hear what like sounded good and what felt good. But yeah, you can see like the shape of this bass line here. It's pretty simple. It just like basically follows what the chord progression is playing. Um, but yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any questions? It's a little bit easier when people ask questions because then it helps to give me feedback in real time. And then also, yeah, just like helps me to kind of feel like there's somewhere to go. See if there's anything else that I missed. But yeah, I like layering in like percussive loops because I feel like oftentimes it'll like also add texture. Um, yeah, one thing I didn't note is that when creating your patterns in arrangement, they tend to be in 4 or 8 bars. And then if you're duplicating those clips, you can keep things from sounding repetitive by adding variation when the patterns repeat by doing these things. I mean, this is just, it's not limited to these things, but you can add different syncopated hits, like maybe like a tom or like a stick is hitting syncopated hits. You can change up with the hi-hat patterns playing. You can change up the velocity pattern. You can remove a hit. So if a kick plays at a certain time, like for example, beat 3, you can have it play on an off beat instead when the pattern repeats. So there's like a lot of ways in which you can break up repetition. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, and I will say, I think the last thing I'll leave you with is again, if you struggle with finding like what a good groove feels like, definitely encourage you to use reference tracks. It's a really great way to basically train your ear, but then also not only can you train your ear, but you can actually then see on a grid where things line up. So you can, and again, this is like really, really helpful when you can separate stems. You can extract the drums and you can actually physically see with your eyes where like certain hats will like line on the grid. And it's particularly useful in like UKG. We were like, oh, it's a 16th or like a triplet 16th. This is why it's like a behind where I would expect it to be. So, but yeah, that's the last thing I think I will leave you with. There are, as far as like stuff that's coming up, I think we've got some more. I think we have a workshop actually on Sunday. Claire Lim, who's awesome, awesome teacher, has been doing a series called Studio to Stage. So if you're wanting to learn how to basically take your produced tracks and learn how to play them live with Ableton, this is a great workshop for you. I think this is the third series of this, but you should be able to catch the first 2 workshops that she taught on YouTube, on our FEMME House YouTube page. And then Baby Wait has been teaching a few workshops. So her next one is May 14th, Building Your Brand, which is a good one. The next workshop I'm teaching is not for a while, September 25th, but then I'll be teaching a course before then. So keep your eyes peeled. FEMME House will announce whenever that course is happening. But other than that, I hope you guys have a great weekend and I hope you learned something useful. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I hope this was helpful for you. Yeah, continue to follow us for more information. This is FEMME House on Instagram. You can follow me, Mini Bear Beats, Beats, on Instagram and everywhere else. And yeah, love you guys. And thanks for your great questions. And I'll see you the next time. Bye.